go. Survivor specialist Phil and Alexa are back with the 9th episode of our Survivor China rewatch. And for anybody who is watching this video, you already know his face because he already had to ruin our Survivor patron trivia game. He won McKenna Feeney's trivia game. The man literally has an encyclopedic knowledge of Survivor. It's kind of absurd, it's kind of disturbing, but it's also very entertaining, and it's great to make him come on to an episode where so little happens that he's going to struggle to talk about what's going on. We have none other than our favorite patrons, except for all the other patrons that I like more, but I won't say who they are. Andy
We love
Vogl.
all of our patrons.
Yeah,
exactly. I want a list of names now. What's up, guys?
Yeah, we definitely have power ranked our patrons before. But we haven't, so never mind.
You'll never know where you landed, Andy. But Andy, it is actually really great to have you on. I know I have to be somewhat sarcastic because you do beat the crap out of me every time we do some type of game. But what do you think about getting the Frosty episode of Survivor China?
I feel like this was like your ultimate comeuppance against me.
It's a compliment to you because we know that you can make this interesting.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see. We'll see if I can do that.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. I'm telling you, because I'll be honest, it's going to be tough for us. Look, I still love I love every episode of Survivor China, and I still think there's some very entertaining moments of this episode. But it ultimately leads to, is it going to be Eric or is it going to be Frosty? And hold on, let me check my watch and see if I give a shit, because it's been 13 years and I do not at all.
Two just polarizing characters,
Yeah.
Both of them. I normally take about. My notebook's pretty small. I usually can take like between a half to like 3/4 of a page of notes. I got a quarter of a page of notes on this one. And Andy, how many notes did you take?
I took 0 notes.
Excellent, excellent.
I'm a terrible note taker in general. Do not tell my students that.
Aren't you a teacher? Yeah,
I am. But I don't take notes often. We like to think it all lives in here. The problem with an episode like this is I remember watching it when I was in middle school, and I feel like the average middle schooler could have gotten a full grasp of everything strategically that was going on.
Mm-hmm. Which was nothing.
None.
Nothing in this episode. I think watching the edit back, you start to see that there were plans put into motion that came to fruition in this episode, but nothing new happened.
Mm-hmm.
Right. We do get the kind of now consistent storyline. Last week was John Robert, coming up with the idea to get rid of James with 2 idols. This episode, we have James saying, I'm totally good because I have 2 idols. Mm-hmm. So we're in the middle of the story right now.
Yeah.
And what could possibly go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong? He has a very small chance of being eliminated with 2 idols, actually. But what's really interesting about with when it comes to reality TV, because I always look at it from a scripted side. You watch Game of Thrones, you watch Boardwalk Empire, you watch Breaking Bad. You'll get like this monster episode where you're like, wow, that was amazing. And the next one's like a little tapered off, and then you get another great episode, and then it tapers off, and you get another great episode. And like that's the writer's fault. But also you have to have ups and downs. You can't have every episode be the Red Wedding. Like that's just not feasible. It's too much and then you become numb to it. But when it comes to reality TV, sometimes you just don't have a choice. And sometimes it really does come down to Frosty and Eric. And neither one of them have really been built up for. Look, I like Frosty a lot more every time I rewatch it. I feel like every time I rewatch the show, Frosty gets a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. But when you're talking about James, we still have quite a disdain for PG at this point, especially now that she's starting to yell at James and being annoying here. You have Courtney, you have Amanda, you have Todd, you have Denise, poor Denise. It coming down to Eric and Frosty, it just doesn't carry any weight.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think this weekend, because I knew I was going to be coming on for this winter of an episode, I rewatched the season from the beginning, and I was focused on Frosty.
What'd you get?
Rewatch.
That's fine.
I'm disappointed in how under-edited he was, for sure, because, I mean, I'm a mild fan of American Ninja Warrior, where Frosty was a big character in the early seasons.
Love being a mild fan.
Wow. Well, keep in mind, like, I'm a super fan of Survivor, and then, like, everything else is kind of just going to be lollygag.
That's true. That's
right.
true.
I remember watching A&W when it first started. I'm like, there's Frosty from Survivor. He's from that show I like. I don't know anything about him. And so I watched this past weekend with just the guys. Okay, I'm going to learn who Frosty is and what Frosty's game was. And I have come to the following conclusion. Survivor hit a big miss by not branding Frosty as the physical threat of this season.
Agreed.
Because I want to be clear. I don't think that tonight's vote came down to Frosty and Eric. I know, like, in the episode, that's how it was portrayed. I think that the reality of the situation was Frosty was the challenge threat. If Todd was truly running the game to the extent that we believe he was, he knew that a couple days ago and was just starting to get the wheels in motion. Frosty was always going to be an early post-merge boot, even though he was in that kind of, not the core, but like the secondary Fei Long alliance.
Well, and what the problem is, what my biggest issue with the Frosty edit on this season is, he's so likable. And they do like him so much. And for him to go here, we hadn't heard any talk of voting out Frosty before this. And I almost feel like they knew it was going to be such an obvious boot, the editors, that they didn't want to give us hints before this. Because at Final 9, is it Jean Robert or PG? Like, Denise votes for PG. And at Final 10, Frosty wins immunity, but it doesn't seem like he was actually in danger of going had he not gotten that. And to be completely honest, he's the most likable one from the Jean Hu tribe, without a doubt, hands down, no questions asked. So yes, PG, we have a built-in feeling towards PG because she threw the challenge. Why didn't we build up Frosty a little bit more? Because when he's giving his confessionals this episode, he's like, I don't want to go. This sucks. I should eat. I didn't want to eat the food. I don't want to leave. You feel for that because, like, this is a competitor. This is a young guy. His relationship with Courtney is amazing. But I think you're right. They just kind of dropped the ball on, like, why does he go home and not Eric? Eric has done nothing to ingratiate himself to the Fei Long group. And Frosty and Courtney, I mean, they should have been dating after this.
And how did Frosty get in with the Fei Long group so easily? It's not like when he and Sharia go over there, that episode is not, Frosty doesn't even come up. It's all just about why Sharia went home. And then all of a sudden, Frosty just has no interest in PG or Eric or Jamie after that. And so how did he get in? Like, how did he end up being the double agent? I know the short answer is because he was, messing around with the idol, but they could have cut him loose and they chose not to. So I think with him, he's the physical threat of the Jean Hu tribe, obviously, like, versus James. Like, I understand how that's a tough comparison, but he also has this, like, cute little personality that just was never really brought into fruition.
Yeah, I think that, first of all, I think he was a bigger physical threat than James was.
I completely agree.
When you look at the way that Survivor designs challenges post-merge, I mean, James so far has had no showing in any of these challenges. And mind you, in 3 seasons, James has never won an individual challenge. Frosty won the first challenge and came in second in the next 2. So he's definitely got the more well-rounded challenge performance, like, persona. But I also think that what happened with Frosty's edit was that Survivor kind of fell into the trap that they create for themselves of needing each episode to be door 1, door 2.
Huge.
Every episode, it's always like, we need to go to Tribal not knowing who's going home. So this whole Frosty versus Eric narrative had to be really forced. Even heard on the reward, Frosty was like, oh man, all the people on Fei Long are really starting to like Eric. I hope he doesn't take my place in the alliance. But my general read on him is that when he went to Fei Long with Sharia, Frosty knew that the writing was on the wall. Best case scenario for him, it was going to be a 5-5 merge. So he was always better suited to get in with Fei Long, find their cracks, and try to make an alliance in there. And based on his voting record, I'm guessing that's what he did.
And my biggest problem with China, I think, in general, other than the stupid swap that puts Aaron and James and Frosty and Sharia literally in a place where they're just going to go home because there's nothing they can do about it. The biggest problem I have with the edit, nothing ever comes of the Frosty knowing about the idols. And that bothers me because they make such a big deal out of it at the time where he finds them and Todd's like, you can't tell anybody, you're in. And Frosty's like, I'm in, I did it, I'm in. And we never see him really fight with that. Maybe the content just wasn't there. Maybe he never really tried to push it. But like, it would have been nice to see some sort of conclusion to that storyline before he went of like, James has 2 idols. Even if he doesn't try to push for that, he could be like, maybe that's a way that I can use this. Like, I'm sure he talked about those idols at some point during the day that he was going home.
Yeah. Did Frosty know that James had the idols, or did he
Actually,
just know that Todd
I don't
and
think
Amanda found it?
I think he just knows that Todd and Amanda found it.
Yeah, I think he thinks that Todd has it. Because we see Todd and Frosty, like, talking together. We never really see Frosty and Amanda talking, but I'll be the one to make the obligatory Amanda comment this week. Amanda's not around a ton, and Frosty wasn't given a ton, so why are we going to be seeing the two of them talking?
Yeah. And I want to ask Andy this. So, Andy, what is your take now as you rewatch on Amanda Kimmel in Survivor China?
Okay. So this is a little bit tough because I do agree with what you guys have been saying, where like she's under edited and she doesn't get a lot of screen time, and it's the Todd show and Amanda's just there because she's his right hand. But I have to remember that Survivor China aired when I was 13 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, every single season of Survivor I had watched, I always, like, now that I know what archetypes are, I would be able to say I was always going to pick my favorite, and it was always the golden boy athlete, the person that I never was. So, like, I was full in on Aaron Riesberger. Like, that was my guy in China. But as soon as he was gone, I didn't care how much screen time she was getting. My eyes instantly went to Amanda because I was a 13-year-old boy.
Mm-hmm.
So
Fair.
I can't actually say that I agree. I was very happy to see her on another season immediately after. It made 8th grade wonderful. But
And 8th grade is usually not wonderful.
No.
yeah, 9th grade was the bad year, but 8th grade was fun.
But yeah,
So,
I hear what
she
you're
didn't get strategic content, but in my view and in my memory, she was always part of the season.
And it fascinates me, though, because Amanda is constantly revered as one of the best to never win. And her second game is incredible. Like, there's no denying it, what she's able to do in that second game, her and Suri and Parvati, how they run that, and Amanda with the idol play and all of that. It's really amazing. But this first season, I say it every time, and I always get, like, yelled at, where I'm like, she doesn't do much in China. She's gorgeous. Yes, she's gorgeous. But she doesn't do that much. And I would argue that at this point, where we are right now, and I do know that at Final 7, her game really becomes much bigger because she's such a big factor in the James moment. But up until now, where we are getting into the Final 7, I would argue she's probably the 6th biggest character on this season at this moment. The only one smaller is Eric Huffman.
Yeah, I mean, Denise has more content than Amanda because just from a content standpoint, like Denise at least, like Denise feels something. Like Denise is frustrated. Denise is on the outs. Amanda is there and Amanda is hot, but we're not even being shown her that much. So we're not even getting the gratuitous shots.
Her butt is just constantly blurred.
Yeah, it's
she
so
just have a hole in her pants.
And it's just so funny because like we've been doing this for however many weeks now, but it's like episode 2 is like the first time the blur happens, and she's like, "My mom's gonna kill me," and I'm like, "Honey, if your mom only knew what the rest of this season was going to be."
Literally the Amanda Butt show. That's literally what it's crazy.
So I'm going to be an Amanda apologist here, though, because I don't know if I agree with you lately, Phil. If we look at the last 2 weeks.
To this point,
because I purposely stopped watching at this week's episode so that I'm very authentic right now.
Love it.
So the last 2 weeks, while I agree character-wise, Amanda has not been big, strategically, Amanda has been shown as the most level-headed because she's been the foil to Todd's erratic thinking. Mm-hmm. When Todd's been like, "Oh, let's just vote out Courtney." Mm-hmm. Amanda's
that's true.
No, that's dumb. Don't do that.
And I do agree.
Vote John Robert. Like those kinds of things she's doing.
And I do think it's starting to come around a little bit and it's starting to show itself. And so I will say it's starting to get there, but it's funny that her edit picks up at the same time as Denise's edit. So like up until this point, I still feel like Denise is a little bit bigger of a character. Now, obviously at Final 7 with what goes down with James and all that, it starts to really snowball and it becomes the who's going to win, Todd or Amanda. Like that really is the point we get to. And then somehow Courtney almost wins the damn game. But I do think like her strategy is starting to come out a little bit, and it mainly is because Todd is such a big character and because we've been watching him the whole time. Like we're getting more Amanda now because it's Todd and because the editors need to set us up for when James is gone. James is by far the star of the season. And so it's, yes, Todd is obviously the better Survivor player, but James is who everybody in the audience was like, oh my God, it's James. Like, I just love James. Well, when he's gone, who do we latch onto? And it's almost like James crawled so Amanda could run. Like, that's kind of how it feels at this point. And, I do agree, though, like right around that Jean Robert boot, it really does start to make a lot more sense why Amanda gets asked back and why Amanda goes on to be one of these great players. Because up until then, it really is Todd calling all the shots and stuff. But now Amanda has to sit in between Todd and Courtney, who are two very different kinds of erratic. Todd is the strategic erratic, and Courtney is the emotional erratic. And those are two hard things to sit in the middle of. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, for sure. And I wouldn't even say that Todd's necessarily being erratic, but I think because Todd is the narrator of the season, we're seeing his whole thought process. Mm-hmm. And then Amanda chimes in at the end to say, no, this is what we're actually going to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we have the internal struggle with Todd, and Amanda's just like, no.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's her input.
I mean, I'm not to totally shift away from this, but I don't think Courtney is the only emotionally erratic person we have. The two like big, I guess like moments that stick out to me both involve James. One of which is how this episode starts, where we get the gratuitous Amanda butt shots. We get the gratuitous James body shots. Goes for the full stretch, and he's like, "Good morning." It's hilarious. It is like he is intentionally being hilarious, and a lot of James is unintentionally hilarious. Mm-hmm. Cut to like 30 minutes and he's telling PG to shut up and that she's a bitch. Yeah. It is the wildest switch I've ever seen.
And go ahead, Andy. What do you feel about this?
So when I saw that, the first thing that came to my mind was Stephanie LaGrossa in Heroes Villains when he does that whole thing. I didn't remember James flipping out after a challenge. Mm-hmm. And the fact that there was this like back and forth, like, yeah, PG was obviously painted as the aggressor here, but
he is not a hero. He is not a hero.
He's my hero. Okay, so here's what I will say, though. And
I love him, but here's what I will say, because we had PG on the show. I honestly do think that PG will tell you the people that she gets along best with are the asshole guys. Like, those are the guys that she loves. She loves Jean Robert. She loved James. She's telling us how her and James, Andy, if you haven't listened to, go listen to our interview with PG, because it's great. And she talks about how her and James are flirting at Ponderosa, and like her and James had this relationship. And I honestly think when Jean Robert yells at Courtney, it's like, oh my God, dude, like this is cringy. It's brutal, whatever. I honestly believe that PG and James just had such a we are equal, and like PG probably like leaned in so hard to this, like, I'm one of the guys, this is how I am. And when she goes at James, I feel like James feels like I can go back at you because this is like what our relationship is. And I do think that I don't think it came from a place of disrespect like what Jean Robert's comments a lot of the time came from. And I think with James, like you just mentioned, Stephanie, Andy, like he gets that aggressive with people who are very aggressive, and I don't agree with it at all. But it's like he's not doing that to Amanda. Yeah. You know, he's not going to do that to poor little Jamie. You know,
has he and Amanda ever disagreed on anything?
No,
just
I think
when he gets voted out.
Yeah, just when she does that. But otherwise, they're buds.
I think, but I agree with you. I don't think that they ever do. And I do think that I think it comes from James's personality. And hey, maybe I'm totally stereotyping the South, but it's one of those things where like you get like a Lane. You're not going to talk to Elaine the same way that you talk to, say, I don't know, Jamie, like Alexa just said. And it's the same thing. Like, I'm from the part of the country, like I'm literally from the town south of where Stephanie LaGrossa was from. Stephanie LaGrossa is a very good caricature, not even so much a caricature. She's a very good character of the women in that town. And my mom is that exact way. And you know what? If like a guy tells my mom, like, shut up, my mom will just keep going back. And then like 10 minutes later, it's like you're drinking a beer together, because that's just kind of the personality of that town. And so I do think that like James, I think him and PG just have this like weird dynamic. And honestly, James versus Stephanie, as far as I'm concerned, those are two athletes who are angry with each other all the time. You know what I mean? Because they're just not getting what they want from each other. So yeah, it comes across really bad, but they just like smash. I mean, it's battering rams. But yeah, the James and PG one, it's just funny how everybody then starts calling PG Jean Robert, which I don't know if that's quite fair.
Well, PG did have the nice comment that she said with a fully straight face, "I can't believe you'd ever accuse me of not trying my hardest."
That's the best part.
That was awesome. That was
the best
awesome.
Part. And think about your James, and you know that the challenge has been thrown because at this point, like, he had to have figured it out, and I'm sure it came out.
Tribal.
Yeah. Yeah, and so she's going to say that to you, like, you're probably going to say, shut up and go away, get away from me. But I will say this for James, I do kind of like that he doesn't get into a screaming match. Like, I just watched Pearl Islands and what Johnny Fairplay and Sandra do, where Johnny Fairplay will just scream at Sandra and then Sandra will scream back. Like, I do kind of like that James literally just laid there and was like, go away, go away, go away. Because, like, I think that's his way of like, I don't want to scream at you. Like, I don't want to lose my cool in any more than this. Like he does with Stephanie in season 12.
I almost like kind of prefer screaming than like what they, because like Fairplay and Sandra, it's like if two cats walk by and they look at each other the wrong way and just like start beating the crap out of each other and then just like continue upon their day. And that happens like every 3 days. I think I prefer the screaming, but that, you know, this was a good scene regardless.
Yes. Andy,
as you say that, my cat's walking by.
I was gonna say there's a cat behind you. It's almost like
that was perfect.
He/she heard us saying,
hey,
there it is. Hello, cat.
Hi, cat.
My dog is fast asleep, so I don't know how.
I have a Survivor themed cat and an Amazing Race themed cat.
I love
What are the names of both of these?
So this guy is Coda.
Mm-hmm.
Love it.
And then the other one was not named after Amazing Race, but he is Leo.
Oh, nice. So Leo and Alana.
Leo and Alana.
Yeah.
Good foresight there.
I like Coda, though. Coda's good. I like that.
Coda's
I
good.
literally went through every single tribe name, and I was like, what could be a cat? And
Fang.
you'd be surprised. But it's Fong.
I know. Well, that's why it would have been funny.
It's a vase.
Yeah.
They're scallops. Yeah.
Yeah. That's why it would have been great if you would have done that. I would have loved that.
I think I'm going to pass. I'm going to pause. So
what's your take though, Andy? Because now I've kind of talked it out, and I mean, I'm sure a lot of people don't agree with me with what I'm saying here, but I just feel like I don't feel like PG probably took offense, and she even went into the water and was like, I'm taking out my anger on James right now. It's probably not the best idea to do this, but I have no allies. I don't know what I'm doing. And I do think like for James to just kind of lay there and be like, go away, leave me alone. And then it escalates, but it never gets into like a screaming match, and he's never telling her. He doesn't actually call her a bitch, which is good. Even though, Alexa, I know you had said that earlier. I just want to clear that. He doesn't actually use that word.
I thought he said, or then maybe he called Stephanie LaGrossa.
He definitely called Stephanie LaGrossa a bitch.
He's definitely said like, shut up, bitch.
Yeah, that definitely.
Which is like a really aggressive.
Yeah, that was definitely to Stephanie, but he didn't say that to PG in this scene because he just tells her to shut up. He does tell her to shut up, and he tells her, go away, shut up. And she goes away. And all of that is just to say, like, I think that PG and James 3 minutes later were probably fine. But Andy, I want to hear what you think. How do you feel about James now that you've rewatched the first 9 episodes of this?
Okay. So 13-year-old Andy loved James, hated PG, wanted her on a platter. 27-year-old Andy.
Yeah, I don't love PG either. She is not supposed to be the one you like.
Yeah, she hasn't grown on me that much character-wise on the rewatch, but I'm a much bigger fan of Courtney now than I was when I was younger, and because of that, James is just not doing it for me this season. Like,
I love James.
I like James, but the reason I rooted for him last time, Cody, you're not going to let me talk at all, are you? The reason that I was rooting for James when I was watching China Air was because I was rooting for Aaron. And then Aaron gets voted out, and in his goodbye, he's like, rooting for my boy James. I'm like, me too, Aaron. But now it's more like, well, yeah, James is a big dude. He's strong. He knocks down trees. He's sometimes funny. But like, I more group him in with Jean Robert, who's doing things that you've mentioned are like in 2020 are just not things that we do and show on television anymore. So I think that his appeal for me is a lot more limited than it used to be.
Interesting.
Yeah, I guess I take like a similar approach, but a little less so because I still think he's it's like
he's
you
hilarious.
can still feel too like I still think everything about him that's hilarious is hilarious, but I'm now just like, why didn't I notice the first go around like how much of an ass he can be? because like you don't care about that stuff.
Like I like him now, but like I love Frosty on the rewatch. Why wasn't I rooting for Frosty?
Huge Frosty stan now.
And that's what I find interesting, because like I'm watching this with my girlfriend and she's never seen it before. And she keeps on loving James. Like she loves James, like to the level that I did the first time I watched. Like she is going to cry when we watch the next episode. She has no idea it's coming. She's convinced James is going to, oh yeah, it's the red wedding for her. She's convinced James is going to win. She's so excited. She was so excited today when we watched the episode that James's name didn't come up. So I do find it kind of interesting, but that she loves him as much as we did, and that, yes, I understand why the appeal would lessen. And I do understand why Alexa and Andy, you're both saying the appeal would lessen. For me, like the first time I watched it, he was one of my all-time favorites, but I think it just comes from the fact too, like I also like love just the old school Survivor players who are not pristine. I love the ones who their blemishes show, but we can still love them for what they are. Like Sandra Diaz-Twine, her blemishes show. Like she is not, she has some bad moments, but I just love like that there's an authenticity to it. And I feel like James might be one of the 5 most authentic people to ever play the game of Survivor. And there's just something about that really resonates with me.
I know. I completely agree with that. And I guess that's not like, I'm not speaking for you, Andy, but that's not what I'm arguing. I'm just arguing that like when I watched it, I literally did not think that James ever did anything bad.
Oh yeah.
And now I'm watching that, and that is not true. But he's like, because you would never get a James on Modern Survivor, and that sucks.
Well, and they also thought, though, that Rupert was an all-out hero his first time playing, and he was going to pop
Rupert's
Johnny Fairplay's head off. He literally said he was going to kill Johnny Fairplay. Like, that's not really kind. Let's just put it that way.
Rupert sucks.
Andy?
Well, I have to rewatch Pearl Islands now because I was also a big Rupert kid.
Great season. I am very curious to see what you think, because I never watched Pearl Islands live. I watched it like whenever I started this podcast, and I was like, in what world does America love this person? Well, I cannot get there.
And that's my thing. So like, Andy, I'll ask you this, like when you're watching like a Rupert or a James and all that, who people just love, they could do no wrong. I mean, we're not picking up on it, but it's all like, it's not like Survivor's hiding their issues. Like, it's not like Survivor's telling you like, you must, like there's certain characters nowadays. And I'm trying to think of someone, maybe like a Christian Hubicki. No, I'm not trying to say Christian Hubicki was running around doing anything wrong on the island. But as far as we were concerned, Christian Hubicki was the most perfect soul to ever play Survivor. He walked out there on that island, and he was just adored and adored and adored and adored, and we must love it. And there was no bad that really came from him. And we've interviewed a lot of the survivors. We interviewed Jamal, who I think had a phenomenal edit, but had the rough start where he's seen as like the lazy man, which he does not want to be seen as. But I feel like the edit has just been so much more focused on where when one bad thing happens, it gets so amplified by social media and other aspects like that, that back in 2007, when China was airing, that just wasn't the case. I mean, it was like, yeah, James probably said something stupid, but then 5 minutes later, you're like, oh, I love James. He was so silly.
Forget.
Yeah.
I also think that like modern day social media, you have clout chasing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to talk about their favorites and how their favorite is their king or their queen and how they can't do anything wrong. And you see it on social media, but back when China was airing, it was a much more internal thought process. So if James is your favorite, everything James does is great. Mm-hmm. And everything negative that happens is happening to James because everybody else is horrible. Mm-hmm. So it's the same thing with Rupert. It's the same thing, probably even like a Tom Westman. It's the same thing with all those people who are universally adored. JT, the first couple goes around. Like, until social media became an influencer, I don't necessarily think Survivor changed the way that it portrayed these characters, but the way that we actively thought about them did. Yeah,
because we like you said, like, or like James, a horrible example, because I'm sure James doesn't even know what Twitter is. But like, someone goes on Survivor and then goes on social media, and then like, you almost know their personality in a different way, and the way that they act on social media then affects how you feel about them when you're watching them. When in China and in these earlier seasons, it's like that is his deal, and like we like, even if we tried to learn more about him on the internet, I'm sure we couldn't, because I'm sure there's no existence. So that is something that is so lacking and just won't come back, and that was a really good feeling
It's a
live.
shame because the grave digging industry needs its influencers.
It really
It does.
Yeah.
It really does. I mean,
It's in desperate need of influencers.
and I kind of miss the authenticity. I miss the
Yeah.
because the problem is right now, I feel like you could do 15 things right in an episode. And the one line that's a little bit questionable is what is blown up all over the internet and all of that. And that's where everybody runs. What did they say on social media? Blah, blah. Like, I think about it this way, Andy. Like, you brought up a good point. When I was watching this season the first time, I was watching it with just my family. One of my friends also watched it, but that was really the extent of what I would talk about Survivor. So for me, it was if my family loved James, I love James. We all love. Who cares? We all love James. It's great. Like we're not then going out and looking for either justification in our love for James
content.
or anything like that. It was, it's kind of this thing like. My friend always says, one of my best friends, he always says with social media, people kind of forgot that their followers are their friends, not like their audience. And it almost feels like that's kind of what happened with Survivor, where you used to watch it with your family. Now you might watch it with your family, and then you immediately go out and say, okay, but what did Phil or Alexa think? And it's like, honestly, who cares what Phil or Alexa thought?
But you should totally subscribe to our Patreon. We go to patreon.com/Survivor Specials. But honestly, like you're completely right. I think that social media and the podcasting and just like the open discussion changes everything. Versus like what Phil said, like we would eat dessert and watch Survivor and then go to bed, and like that was, and we were like excited for next week, but like we didn't like analyze it. I didn't even know you could. Yeah, fair.
Well, in fairness too, my family does not watch Survivor.
Okay.
So you like seek out the
I would always look for who can I talk to about this. So when I discovered podcasts and I discovered, wait, there are other people who are as batshit crazy as me who watch this show. Sign me up.
Up.
I actually, in my opinion, I think it's almost better now, and I say that with a grain of salt, but I think that there are certain people on Survivor who I would root for now based on their social media presence and what I think of them to be in real life, who I would never have rooted for in the pre-social media.
And probably vice versa too, right?
Yeah, because I definitely, I'll pick a favorite, and great example. Survivor Co. Wrong. I had the genius decision of starting out rooting for Anna.
Great call.
Yeah. That was Will's favorite too. That was my favorite thing was Anna. Yeah.
That was an oops moment. And then I've since gotten on the Win Gerald train.
Of course.
Win Gerald, never heard that before. I've never heard that one.
Winchell Fitzgerald.
Alexa, so we're moving and I've taken down all the wall art, but I still have all of Michelle's nicknames listed right there so that I can just pull them out whenever I need to. So that's the only wall art we have in my apartment.
I've heard Winchell. I've never heard
comes on and wins.
Yeah.
I've heard Winchell a lot. My favorite is Byshell, but because it just like came out of like the internet, the depths of the internet. But Fitz or whatever.
Win Gerald.
Win Gerald is so. Anyway, are you going to keep going on this conversation? Because I was about to pivot away.
I was going to keep going because I wanted to point out something with Andy there, because I do believe that when I watch Survivor China, this is my favorite season. It's always been my favorite season. It always will be my favorite season. Todd, Courtney, Amanda, James, they're always going to be four of my favorite players of all time. I'm always going to love what an ass John Robert was. I'm always going to love how much I hated PG and now how I really don't understand why I hated her so much, and I probably should have given her a little bit more respect. I'm always going to love those elements. Had this season aired now, had what China does aired now, Denise would have been canceled, which she kind of was anyway because of what happens at the reunion. Courtney would have been canceled. Instead, we all love Courtney and we all wish she would play again. James probably gets canceled. Like when you start,
I think Courtney survives. I think Courtney survives.
Courtney survives.
No, because
what she says about Denise, but what she says about Denise is horrible.
No, do you know what? Actually, no. The only thing that gets Courtney in trouble is what she says about Todd. That is bad.
Well, that's two of them, though. She has Todd and Denise, because with Denise, she says the whole thing about, like, being on welfare and all of that. So, like, you can't say that stuff. And so my whole thing is, though, this. Like, I'm still, like, it's supposed to be, like, a microcosm of society. We don't live in a utopia. Like, we don't. And I get you also don't want to have Dan Spilo on your show. Like, there's blatant differences here and blatant things that you should not have. But I also think, like, you need your villains and you need your heroes. And I just kind of wish that like we didn't just blow people out of the water so that they disappeared, because I honestly like the interactions of Survivor season 40. And now we don't actually hear from about 85% of them because they have just left social media and are going to go disappear like Amanda Kimmel did into her Montana cabin, maybe. I mean, nobody knows where Amanda Kimmel is. So
unclear. Yeah. Unclear.
Amanda Cooper. That's right. That's right.
Yeah, she rebranded. That's how bad it got. But to get back to James, the important question that I have is, how do we feel about him consuming 8 cheeseburgers?
Seven.
He does say 7.
Oh,
he does say,
okay.
but I think he had the eighth one in his mouth, right? Didn't he have the 8th one in his mouth?
7.5. How about that?
But that means between the other 3 people, they had 4.
Yeah.
That's wild.
To be fair, one of them was Courtney. Yeah.
They should have made more. 15 cheeseburgers, or like however, that's nothing.
Do you know? Well, so they started with 12, and the reason they did 12 is there's 8 people left in the game. They would assume that at least 2 people would participate, and then if it's only 2 people, everybody gets 2 cheeseburgers. That's what they were thinking. So that's why they did it. I mean, nowadays they'll literally just give you the heaping plate of nachos or pizza or something like that. Thank you, Andy. But so I just think it's crazy. Like, you also had, I mean, Courtney's going to eat 1 cheeseburger, if that. Like, there's no way. I mean, her stomach just can't do it. Todd probably only had 1, and he was wolfing down the fries because the fries were right in front of him. And then poor Denise was on the opposite side. She probably got the 2 cheeseburgers. But the funniest part of this episode is if you look at James the rest of the episode, and I'm telling you, it goes all the way up till Tribal Council. His stomach is sticking so far out, and it's like, it's one of those things where like when you're really bloated and like you almost like when you touch your stomach, you're like, wow, it's like rock hard right now. Like it's just that bad. It's like his abs they went and moved like 3 feet forward, and they were like, we're still here, but what is behind us? Like that had to have been a rock, and it's absolutely hilarious.
Because it's the only thing that's inside of his body at that moment.
It's so crazy. Andy, what do you think?
Well, so I'm also, the visual that's coming into my head is him downing the pitcher of iced tea as he's doing this.
I know.
Yeah.
So
it's like Joey Chestnut. Like, it's disgusting.
Dunk the cheeseburger in the iced tea and then eat it.
It's so gross.
My biggest fear about one day going on Survivor, and the one thing that I'll always say to casting if they're ever like, what are you the most worried about, is the threat of severe gastrointestinal distress.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know, like, GameBot and me would never have eaten in that challenge anyway, no matter how secure of a spot I was in, although I totally get it with this group. But the main reason I wouldn't eat during that challenge is because I couldn't possibly stand to sit at Tribal that night for 3 hours without a bathroom break.
Talk about your feelings.
And pay attention.
Yeah.
Like, you get information at Tribal. Forget about having to like get up to walk and vote. It would not.
No, you would have to be Jeff. I'm gonna go right here because I gotta make a quick pit stop.
Like, just vote me out because I have
they do they
problems.
have a way to signal to the people, like if you have to pee or you have to use a bathroom break. Yeah, and I'm the same way. I always say this. So I would sit out for food in certain situations. It would have to be like if it's hold your arm above your head. I have dislocated my shoulder. There's no way I'm gonna be able to do that challenge. Like there's just no way. So I would probably sit out for the food, but I would have to really control myself. Because I have like the worst stomach. Like I have like the worst diet. I love eating spicy food. I love eating fried food. I love all that. And so I get heartburn and all that terribly. Like there'll be nights where I literally can't sleep because I'm like, oh my God, this is so bad. I cannot imagine not eating for 27 days or whatever it was at this point. And then it's like, all right, Phil, now go eat 2 cheeseburgers and as many fries as you can shovel in, and you're dehydrated. Like no matter how much I drank there, I'm going to be dehydrated. Oh my God, would that be a miserable 3 days? Like I would be out of commission for 3 full days.
Yeah, as growing up as a Jewish kid who would spend 1 day a year, 24 hours, no food or drink, that first meal you get back in, the number of times I made a bad choice and gotten so sick after, and that's after 1 day.
We went, I will never forget this. When I was in college, we had a friend who was Jewish, and I forget which holiday it was after, but we went to the Cheesecake Factory the day, like when he could finally eat again. And he did the fast, and we went to the Cheesecake Factory, and he got pasta. And it was like it was like ziti, you know?
They're
and
like carbonara.
And he threw up right on the plate, right at the table while we were there. And that would be me, though, because like that's not even a guy with a bad stomach. That's just in general, when you're starving and then you shovel food, don't eat wake up at 7 in the morning and don't eat anything until 8 o'clock at night. Not a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then eat. That's 13 hours and you're going to feel like absolute garbage after you eat. Your body goes into shock almost. I can't even imagine.
Let's have a bagel with a nice schmear.
Yeah, well, of course.
A
and
nice
your
schmear.
locks. And your locks.
So New York. Get a nice schmear and locks.
I love it.
So New York. I love that.
But yeah, it's a great point. It's a great point, Alexa. I'm glad you brought it up. That is an amazing scene, and it's just disgusting how he does that because it's gross.
Really, obviously there's not a ton in this episode, but how do we feel about Denise eating? Like, why does she do that?
So again, my prediction on this, or my take on this, is that the Frosty boot was forecast weeks before.
It's either going to be PG or it's going to be Frosty, right? Like they knew.
I didn't even think it was between them. I really think like Frosty was the intended target for a while, and I think that the genre, like maybe even as soon as he won the first immunity, he was the target. But I think when Jean Robert just like presented himself as an opportunity to go because of the idol talk, that's why Jean Robert left before him. But Frosty was always going tonight. And I also I agree with what Phil said in terms of like when you eat, you have to eat when the challenge is something that you don't think you can win. Because at that point, like the top tier is the winner of the challenge. That's what you want. The second best thing is to not play and eat.
Yeah.
The worst thing you could do is play and lose.
Is be Eric.
I don't know. I would venture to guess and color me prejudiced and color me someone who's making a sweeping generalization based on one's appearance and what I know about them after 13 episodes. Denise was not winning this challenge. So she
And I think like, you know, obviously James is going to eat. He's got 2 idols. He doesn't need this. It doesn't matter. And that's what makes me laugh.
In the
is
majority
they say
alliance.
they say he's the favorite to win every immunity challenge. He's never close to winning an immunity challenge. And he wasn't going to win this one, even if he did it. He would have stabbed those things really hard, but he wasn't going to win this challenge. Todd, it totally makes sense. Todd is totally running this game, and he knows he's running this game. He knows that if his name comes up, he's going to get word back to him. Courtney, she doesn't really give a shit. She doesn't really care if she's even playing the game. Of course she's going to eat. But yeah, the Denise one is the most questionable, I think, out of the grouping. But I think she's just probably like, I'm not going to win anyway. And if they really want to get rid of me, they're going to be stupid for it. Like, and she did talk to James. Remember, she talks to James after James has his blow up with PG and even before he has a blow up with PG and all of that. And I think James was able to really pull her back in and be like, no, look, it's fine. You're still with us. We just didn't want it. They were supposed to tell you. I don't know why they didn't. It's their fault. And I think he did a good job of selling that. I really do.
He sold it as someone was supposed to tell you, almost as if like, everyone thought someone else's job was to do it. That's the only reason you didn't know.
It's a good move.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so I'm not too James is smart. He's got the street smarts. I really do think like he does. He's got that kind of like, you know, he knows how to talk to you and all of that. He's not the most strategic. He doesn't see the game the way that Todd sees it or the way that Amanda sees it, but he does have his wits about him. And yeah, I think what he did with Denise was good. And also like, I think Andy, you're spot on. Denise was never going to win this and she knew she wasn't going to win it. So what's the point? Amanda goes out there and does it probably because she knows that everybody else is going to sit out and somebody from the alliance needs to go out there and try to beat all of them just in case there's any other type of craziness out there in terms of idols or whatever, even though I doubt they were thinking there was going to be a third idol. But just in case. But yeah,
also,
beating Eric sucks.
People who sat out, Courtney was the only one who was on the reward. So like Amanda had just eaten.
True. Yeah, let's talk about that reward. We do the reward challenge. It's the bouncing on the drums. And honestly, I feel like this would be the easiest challenge of all time because it's just like that's not even difficult hand-eye coordination. It's literally just like, okay, bounce, 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 quick to you, and then bounce, bounce,
transition between the drums. Like once you learn how your drum bounces, you're good.
You just keep doing, and that's what Frosty and Eric did the whole time.
Yeah, I like the challenge, but I think, like we were just talking about on The Amazing Race, you can definitely make it harder. You can definitely make it more difficult. I think it's a cool idea because it's something we like. I don't think ever see again. Yeah. But the only like really tough transition is bouncing it a teensy bit farther to get it over this piece of wood.
Yeah, it's nothing difficult. And I thought it was like interesting and it's funny that Courtney's team wins because Courtney, anytime she wins at anything is amazing. And that reward was a great reward. And the China rewards are just phenomenal. And this was a great one where they go on the river and you know, Eric's goat impersonation is freaking disturbing. I don't like that.
He's also hitting on the goats, which is like a really weird comment.
Courtney who said, hey, like stop hitting on the goats. They're a couple or something like that. Absolutely amazing.
That is the most accurate goat impression I've ever seen, and I didn't like it.
It was weird. I
But
didn't
again,
like it
totally
either.
lost in the ether. We think that the first person to do an impression of an animal was Tony speaking llama. Like
Yeah.
Eric Huffman, game changer.
Game changer.
Game changer.
He should have been on it. And actually, you're right, Andy. Amanda is the 7th most important person of this season at Final 7 right now. You're right. Eric Huffman jumps above her because he spoke.
Yep.
He spoke goat. He did.
Amanda
Speak
wouldn't
goat.
dare.
Yeah.
What do
No,
you guys think about Amanda lying about the food that they were given?
So we heard from PG that supposedly everybody was doing that. And and she said it would get to the point where it was obnoxious because she never won any of the rewards. And so what would annoy her is every time somebody would come back, they would talk, oh, it wasn't that great. Don't worry. You didn't really miss that much, whatever. And she'd be like, stop. Like, you guys are being annoying. Like, just tell us what you had. Tell us what you did. Like, we actually want to hear about the experience. So this was actually a plan, supposedly, that whoever kept winning the challenges, that's what they just kept doing. Even when James and Jean Robert won the last one with Amanda and Todd, they just told them, oh, yeah, we just had like basic Chinese food. That's all it was, which I mean, who cares? Like, tell them you ate fried chicken and mashed potatoes. Why is that any better than Chinese food? Honestly, I like Chinese food more.
Yeah, it would upset me to know that you were eating no matter what you were eating. So yeah, I don't think that. Maybe it's because they've like, maybe it's because all these reward challenges are getting Chinese food, so maybe they're craving American food. But at the same time, like, I don't think anybody really has preferences at that point. So whatever.
Food is food.
Yeah.
Food is food. Exactly. So I don't know. And honestly, that river thing was amazing. And I thought like those cliffs where you're just like, how does that even form? I always find those things, I call them like the James Bond Islands, where you're just like, how is it in the middle of nowhere and like not touching the water all the way and somehow standing straight up? I forget which James Bond that is, but it's very similar to that. But man, I just think I think that's like the
awesome.
coolest thing that you could possibly see. And you're on a river and you're just drinking and having a good time. And I'll be honest, this proves that your starting tribe really matters in the old school Survivor. Not so much nowadays, but in old school Survivor, definitely. Because if Courtney, Todd, Amanda, Eric, Frosty all start on the same tribe. I know Todd wasn't on this reward, but if they all start on that same tribe, God, that's your final 5. I mean, Eric and Frosty make it through, no doubt about it, because they just love Eric and Frosty. Like, they like them a lot, and they don't have the same feel for PG or Denise or James or clearly Jean Robert, who is sitting over on the jury right now.
Agreed.
Yeah. So that's how I feel about that. Andy, what have we missed? What have we not talked about?
Yeah, that was the final.
Minutes,
that was the final note I had. So deferring to you, Andy, with all your notes.
All my notes. Let me read them. The immunity challenge seemed very easy.
They were doing like 5 of them.
Yeah, there had to be like a lot of skill rounds. 4 or 5. Like, it was never. They never grew it.
Andy, have you ever played Cheers the Governor?
Yes, but I don't know if we're playing the same rules.
So you might also have a different name.
Yeah, everyone has a different. Yeah,
I have a team that I call Cheers Governor, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Probably
So
the same thing, yeah.
It's probably the same thing where you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 14, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 7. This is essentially that, except you're just thinking of it on your own. And like, to me, like, these are the easiest types of challenges. Like, Andy, I honestly think you and me would still be up there if we were going against each other out there in China, because I think both of us could keep this going. And I was really surprised. Like, you know, normally, like, in this, we miss something. Like, us as an audience don't see something that happens where it'll be like, okay, black, blue, red, green, yellow, purple, silver. And you're like, what? I can't follow that as an audience. But Jeff was literally listing like 5 or 6 items. And they couldn't, and it's like rat, rabbit.
So
I think they were messing up the rat, rabbit, and mishearing it. That would, like, otherwise, yeah, I'm with you.
I was shocked at how quickly this was over.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna give them the benefit of the doubt and say that there were more rounds, but like, I think of a couple things. First of all, like, when we do the memory challenges now, like, Probst will do the whole thing where he announces the order, and then he'll be like, put up the first one.
One at a time. Very
you
slow.
You have a lot of time to forget. But never going beyond 5 was a choice.
It was weird.
Yeah, that was weird.
Dumb.
I agree. I think it was a cool idea to implement Chinese culture and all of that, and kind of try to use that, but I'm shocked, and I hope for James's intestinal fortitude that this went on longer than 3 or 4 or 5 rounds, whatever it was. But man, I just feel like Frosty, like it just, and you know what actually might have made this harder? The fact that you're trying to focus while everybody else is eating. And so your mind is on the food. And I think that might be part of the reason why they chose the food for this challenge, because it becomes harder to focus when you're like, man, I wish I was eating a cheeseburger. Man, I wish I was eating a cheeseburger. Whereas normally you could put your 100% focus on this. James is over there dipping full cheeseburgers in pitchers of lemonade. That's gonna throw you off, I feel.
Yeah. Nothing more delicious than that.
Nothing more delicious. But I agree with you, Andy. I mean, especially for somebody who, like, I know you with, like, you probably have or are close to having a photographic memory of some sorts. Yeah, exactly. You're in Mensa, I think you've told me before. But it's one of those things where, like, I was like, oh, like, I could sit here and watch that and, like, half-assly pay attention and be like, yeah, it's rat, rabbit, dragon, monkey, ram. Like, what is different? Like, and I'm not participating. I'm not playing for $1 million. So I feel like there had to be something that we just missed, or they just happened to pick the right cast to do a really easy challenge.
Yeah.
We do always hear about how, like, food deprivation affects their mental states. I remember that was a big trope in Cagayan, one of the later immunity challenges. But 5 things in a row on day 20, what was it, day 27?
Yeah.
Yeah, not that late.
I don't think it would be that
Not
bad.
that bad.
No, I agree. What else you got? We're turning it over to you. You're now the host.
I mean, it's inevitable.
Don't force it if it's not there.
Nah.
I'm pretty impressed that we've made it this long.
Unanimous vote? Thoughts on that?
It's pretty much one of the only ones on this season.
Yeah.
So, but that also means PG was like 100% on the Eric train, which I would think if we're so anti-PG over on Fei Long, that would be a reason to vote Eric out right there.
That's true.
If PG's cool with Frosty going, then maybe Frosty should stay.
That's true.
They probably just found nothing intimidating about Eric, but versus Frosty, who like got in with them and like is aware of the idol situation. So maybe that was why they.
You know what the biggest problem is, and I look, I'm putting words into Todd's mouth here, but what I'm thinking maybe is Todd's starting to get worried. All right, Courtney and Frosty are getting a little too close. If I lose Courtney, that's a number for me. We're getting down to final 7, and now there's a pair there, and I can't split them up, and she never wants to vote out Frosty. Plus, James keeps saying he doesn't want to bite the apple, but he's got 2 idols, and if we try to blindside him and he catches word of it, he plays one of those idols, and he says, I'm going to go with Courtney and Frosty. Now, all of a sudden, there's 3, and James and Denise are really tight. Like, I think he started to kind of foresee pairings happening, and if you're going to run the game of Survivor, you need to be – Adam Klein said this. He said, you need to know who everybody's number 1 is, and you need to know when you're not somebody's number 1. And I think what Todd started to see was Courtney and Frosty are becoming their own pair. And that is bad for me because I might have Amanda 100% of the time, but if I lose Courtney, I have Amanda 100% of the time. Denise and James are not locked in all the time, especially since at some point we need to vote James out of this game while he has all these idols and stuff. And how am I going to be able to pull that off? So I think that might have been a little bit of it. You take away Courtney's biggest adversary and she wakes up and says, it's Christmas morning, everybody. And I love how she says it in like a British accent, like she's literally in like a Charles Dickens novel. And then then you take away her closest person who could potentially hurt you, which is Frosty.
I agree, except it took literally 0 effort to coerce Courtney into voting for Frosty.
True. That's true.
So,
she does call him her survivor boyfriend.
Yeah. I'm going to stand by my claim that Frosty's boot was coming for a while, and the episode just painted it as a choice between 2 people.
Yeah, that's a good point. I honestly think you might be onto something with that. And yeah, I think that's a good point.
Because Frosty was great, and I wish
he was.
More of him.
And this is by far the most boring episode of the post-merge, for sure. Mm-hmm. No questions asked. So
got final 6. Get ready for that one.
Well, I like final 6 though. You know why? Because it's the aftermath. It's the beginning part of that episode is really good. Obviously the boot is what it is, but the beginning of that episode is a really fun episode because we get the aftermath of like, holy crap, like what did we just do? It's just a great moment. I love it. All right, Andy, keep going. What else you got? Come on. You don't have to have other stuff either. Like it's not that much pressure.
Let's think. Oh, okay. Last thing that I can think of.
Okay.
When Frosty's having his one-on-one with Todd, what was up with that camera work? It looked very Blair Witch. You know
Which-
what I'm talking
I got
about?
nothing for
Like-
you, so
like
let's hear
right
it.
before Tribal, when Frosty's having his one-on-one with Todd, there are like these very tight close-ups. I'm like,
Oh, I
you
did
guys
notice
love
that.
both of them, and it's like, I don't know if
Why?
I've ever seen that before or since.
They had a lot of weird Todd shots in this one. Like there's the part where like I forget who's talking to who, but Todd is just like staring at them like very blankly, and it kind of looks like his head's gonna fall off. And then I did notice that. I mean, maybe they were just trying to mix it up a little bit. I don't
It looks like
know.
they were just like holding like a little GoPro on a selfie stick. Like the
Yeah.
camera quality diminished, and it was like right in the face.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, and I will say this: I can guarantee you, it wasn't a GoPro on a selfie stick, though. I can guarantee you that, Andy, because I know you were 13 at the time, but we didn't have those yet
No,
as
we did not.
children. No, no. I mean, they didn't have HD yet, man. I mean, that's the bummer. Survivor wasn't in HD. What was the first season in HD? 17, right?
Yeah,
Kaboom.
Kaboom.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Because it was like, let's make it, we're going to go to like the most beautiful place we possibly can. And like all of us poor Amanda fans, it was of course after Amanda that now all of a sudden we get the HD. It's such BS. I know we all screamed to the heavens on that
How
one.
dare they? The Survivor
Imagine
gods.
getting
They gave
Ja-
her back to us.
I know that's true. But imagine getting James's abs like in HD, like when he was 3 years younger than what he was on Heroes Villains. Like,
Every episode would look like the challenge where they were lathering up to go for the balls.
it's true.
Those challenges are so good, especially like when you get to. I know they do it in One World, but it's just like, all right, guys, you're gonna put some oil and you're gonna just run around and try to like grab.
Slide
it's
on
just
things.
crazy.
Yeah, the whole baby oil thing always freaks me out a little bit.
Yeah.
Especially there's some people who, I mean, no offense, and I'm probably one of those people that don't need to be rubbed in baby oil. Like there's just some of those people where it's just not really necessary. That's all I got. I will say my one last thing I will say is, man, do I miss when they used to show the pick'ems, because I love the schoolyard pick'ems. That's 2 weeks in a row we got it. I love that it was the same order again. PG takes James, even though she shouldn't have, and then yells at James anyway. Like they just assume James is going to be great at everything. And like, that's an easy, you take Frosty with the first pick. It's parkour. It's all coordination. You 100% of the time take Frosty with the first pick there, but they didn't. And I love that it comes down to Denise and Courtney again. And Denise got her dream. She was not the last pick.
She
so
got it.
there was at
MVP
least
to
that.
Denise.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, all right, Andy. Well, thank you for being here, and thank you for not trolling me too hard, even though you beat me in everything we do. Alexa, why don't you take us home?
Thanks for spicing up this episode, Andy. If there's anyone we could trust to pull 56 minutes out of recapping this, it is absolutely you. So for those of you who listened to this an hour ago, I'm going to repeat everything I just said. McKenna Feeney and I we are watching for the first time Australian Survivor Season 2. So we are going to recap episode 2 and episode 3 this coming Monday. And we are continuing our Amazing Race and Survivor China recaps and rewatches on Wednesday night. So if you guys are looking for us, you can always find us on Wednesdays. Make sure to become a patron. We are doing our November retrospective is going to be about the funniest moments in Survivor history, something that weirdly enough we've never actually talked about. We have a Q&A thread up. If you want to give us this as $1 and join our awesome Facebook group, you are welcome to do that. We have different levels of patronage for whatever you're interested in. Andy, thank you so much for coming on, and we will see you all very soon.
Bye, everyone.